Hey everybody, this is Todd with Industrial Comfort. If you watch a lot of woodworking videos on YouTube, chances are you've probably come across one of these, a cross-cut sled for the table saw. These are really cool little sleds that allow you to do detail work, obviously make crosscuts, make tenons, cut rabbets, do all sorts of really cool stuff that generally may not be super safe on the compound miter saw. Every table saw should have a good crosscut sled, and today I'm going to show you how to make one. I'm going to be using plywood for this project, and I'd encourage you to do the same for a whole bunch of different reasons. The first of which is you can buy this dimensionally in a size that's very reasonable. So this is a 2 foot by 4 foot, which is significantly cheaper than a big 4 by 8 sheet, and it's also a lot easier to handle. The other thing that's important to note is it comes in a bunch of different thicknesses, and you have to remember that for every amount of material you put on top of the table here, you are proportionately reducing your cutting capacity. So if I have a bottom of my table here, or the sled, that's a 1/2 inch off the table, I am reducing the blade's cutting capacity by that same amount, a 1/2 inch. So I've chosen a 1/2 inch because a 1/4 inch is going to be too flimsy and 3/4 of an inch is going to be too much. Now I am going to be using 3/4 inch plywood for the bridge that's going to serve as the support in the back and in the front. In fact, I'm going to use 2 pieces on each side and laminate these together, which we'll do in a further step. Now, the final piece is the miter bar. Now there are 2 things that you can use for this. You can either cut a piece of wood yourself to use as the miter bar, or you can get these pre-fashioned miter bars that are made from aluminum that have these adjustable nylon buttons that take up any slack in these bars. Now, the only downside to these is that they come with these 3 pre-tapped holes for a 1/4 by 20 inch threading. Now, the challenge is that you have to drill up through the bar, taking care that you're not disrupting the threads, and then you have to screw the bolts in from the top. So there is a challenge in terms of ensuring that you have the right degree of accuracy to get this done correctly. Now, the challenge with wood, on the other hand, is that it takes a lot to cut these things precisely to ensure that you have no slop or play in the miter tracks, and wood does have a tendency to warp over time. So I'm going to go ahead and use these bars. So for the next step, I'm going to cut this to size. I'm probably personally going to go with about a 36 inch wide sled. The width is entirely up to you and the size of your saw. Then I'm going to cut these strips down to the same length, or width I should say. Then I'm going to laminate them together, and we'll come back after the wood has dried overnight and start putting everything together. Okay, we've come to my least favorite and most stressful part of the project, which is attaching the miter bars to the underside of the base of this sled. Now, to do so, I'm going to apply some foil tape to the sides of these bars, which I've done here, and I'll repeat on this bar. And this is to center the bars in the track. Now, I did mention, yes, they have these adjustment buttons, but I want to make sure that the tracks are in the center, just to pick up any slack should there be any issue when I drill the holes for the screws to mount these. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is apply some double-sided tape, as I've done here, which will allow these bars to stick to the bottom of this base so that I know exactly where they need to be so that I can start the drilling process. Make sure that you don't overuse this tape. It is really strong, and you have a tendency to tear out the wood if you use too much. Now, keep in mind, these bars are shallower than the tracks they sit in, so you want to use some equal-sized washers that you can lay in the tracks that'll elevate these miter bars so that when you drop the deck here, it'll make contact with the bars. Now, finally, what I'm going to do here is take this piece of plywood and I'm going to shim it in place here at the edge of the table. This will allow me to line the bars evenly so that they end on the same plane, so that when I drop the deck, I can use this as a reference point and everything will be straight and true. Okay, now I'm going to use a drill to drill the holes through, and then we'll countersink them from the other side and put the screws in. Now the bolt holes are 1/4 inch, but a 1/4 inch bit is going to be slightly larger than the hole in the threading, so I need to use a 13/64. Now you want to just be careful that you don't damage the threading here, so take your time and go slow. Now we can take this foil tape off. Against my better judgment, I'm going to take a shortcut, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill through the top until I hit the miter bars and hope that I don't damage the threading. Ordinarily, I'd remove the bars, then drill the holes, and then screw the bars back to this base. But I like the fact that the bars are in the exact position that I want them through the double-sided tape, so I'm going to go this route. For this next step, I'm going to cover the holes with some painter's tape, and I'm going to use this countersink bit to widen the holes to accommodate what are going to be a flathead screw like this, so I can countersink it into the top here. Now, one thing I didn't mention at the beginning of the video are the bolts that I'm going to use to attach the miter bars to the base of this sled. These are 1/4 by 20 inch thread count on 3/4 inch flathead screws. All right, let's go check the fit. All right, everything is looking good. The next step is to measure and cut the pieces of plywood that I'm going to laminate together for the bridges, back and front. Once the glue has dried in the morning, we'll go ahead and mount these to the sled and make sure everything is true. I've got the wood cut for the bridges that we're going to create for the front and rear of the sled, which essentially is comprised of 4 pieces of plywood, 36 inches wide, which is the width of the sled itself, by 4 inches high. This will give us at least 1.25 inches of clearance above the height of the blade for safety purposes. So we'll get these glued up, and when the glue dries, we'll attach them to the sled. The glue up for the bridges is complete. Now, I don't have a jointer, so I'm going to square the edges of these bridges with the table saw. The next thing I'm going to do is score a line 3/4 of an inch in on either side. Then I'm going to pre-drill some holes, which I'm going to use to hold the bridges in place from underneath. Now before I drill the holes from the underside to attach the bridge, I'm actually going to clamp it in place. Now I flip the sled around so that I'm going to be doing the rear first, then I'll turn it around and do the front. And because we won't be measuring anything off the back, you don't have to worry about a level of precision. Okay, now I'll flip this over and screw it in place. Now that the rear bridge is in place, I'm going to raise the blade on the table saw and cut a line about 3/4 of the way down the bottom of this sled. I'm going to put a piece of scrap plywood on top to minimize any tear out, and then we're going to use this line to orient the front bridge to ensure that it's perfectly square. One more thing we're going to do before we assemble the front bridge, and that's cut a very small 45-degree angle off the corner of this front board. And the reason that we're going to do that is to create a channel for sawdust. So if you're making a lot of successive cuts with this table saw sled, dust is likely to accumulate in the corners. And so we want to prevent that dust from offsetting any wood that you push against this fence. Now that I've cut the channel in this front bridge, I'm going to position it with the clamp and use this straight edge against the line that we cut to get a perfectly perpendicular front fence here. Now that I've found my square angle, I'm going to flip it over and we're going to drill this from underneath. If I didn't mention it before, these are 1¼ inch decking screws. All right, I'm going to flip this back over and we'll do a test cut. Yeah. That's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of the screws in, and then I'm going to show you the final step. Now the last thing I'm going to do before calling this project a wrap is coat the underside of this table saw sled with some paste wax. This will allow the bottom of the sled to coast more smoothly across the top of the table, and it will protect the wood. And here's our cross-cut table saw sled, incorporating a sawdust channel in front here. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.